It's another fine day at Camp Dynasty. I am Counselor Austin, joined by Counselor Collin, and we are moving our way through rankings 2.0. We've hit quarterbacks, we've hit running backs, we've hit wide receivers, which can only mean that it is time to talk about everybody's favorite position group in fantasy football, tight ends.
Famously easy to predict the outcome of tight ends. Obviously, always get it right. But this class is definitely an interesting one. I don't know if it's like really good or if something has changed about college football to make tight ends look better. But I feel like I watched a lot of guys, and every time I was like, this guy's pretty solid. I don't know exactly what that means.
I'm going to come out and say I think it means that this is a really good tight end class.
Yeah.
I think we had kind of talked about it a little bit, and because we hadn't talked about these guys a ton. There's a few of them that we, of course, talked about a little bit more than others, but I think even all the way to the end of the season where guys were still emerging and you were still learning just how good some of these guys actually are. And then when I dove into the film, I mean, there were some guys that I was kind of like, yeah, I guess I'll watch him too. And then that player ends up being a player that I'm going to be talking about today. So this was a very fun experience. And like you said, it's always a bit of a tricky exercise trying to understand what tight ends are and what the college tape means about the NFL projection and all of that. But hey, that's what we're here to do. So I guess let's try to do it.
Yeah, I think that they don't always translate like how you see them in the college game, and I think that it's hard to know why exactly that is, and like what about each of the little nuances they're not getting right. And there are some, like a couple years ago, we had a good class with Laporta and like Michael Mayer and company, but they also sometimes just don't even turn into fantasy assets. I think that's another wrinkle. Like you can be a good tight end in the NFL for a very long time and just never really be a good tight end in fantasy. So it's always trying to, thread the needle of go to a productive offense, go to an offense that passes the ball a lot, that features their tight end, and have a tight end that has the ability to take that and turn it into elite production. So that, I think that's the challenge of why it's so tough. It's they do the blocking and the receiving, plus they have to fall into the right situation, the perfect situation usually.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. It's like this is the position where you have to be really strong. You have to be able to match up with NFL defensive linemen and run block against them. And you have to be really fast because you got to be able to separate from NFL linebackers and safeties and sometimes corners. So, I mean, these guys, the tight ends, are, some of the most talented football players, I think, in the entire game. The good ones are. And that's why it's really hard, because the step up from the college game, what's strong enough, if you look pretty good as a blocker in college, that might not cut it at the next level. Same can be said about running routes and getting open and putting up yards. So that's the tough part about the position. So let's talk about some of the better guys and talk about maybe what the future could hold. And I think, some of them, that range of outcomes is pretty wide. So top fives for tight ends, not going 8 deep, although there will be some honorable mentions, I think, today, unless we get some list crossover as we have. But remind me, who started last week?
I started last week.
Okay, so I can kick us off then this week. So my number 5 tight end for 2025 is Gunnar Helm, Texas.
Okay. I have him higher.
You have him higher. All right. So Gunnar Helm, this is a player that was extremely productive for Texas this season. This was his 4th year at Texas, but I believe that first year is a red shirt. So 786 yards and 7 touchdowns with the playoffs included in that total. So very productive player for this team. One of their more productive receiving players, period, on the season. Standing at 6'5", 250. So he's, kind of prototypical. I know once upon a time, 250 was maybe considered a little on the smaller side. Nowadays, if you're 250, it's like, oh my God, this guy's
he's huge,
pretty big. So he's got the size boxes checked. And what I saw from him on film from this year was a player that is very quick for his size. I love seeing that sort of bell curve when you're watching guys that are ranging from, 230s up to 260s, and seeing those players that are 250 plus moving similarly to guys that are 15 or 20 pounds lighter than them, always one of my favorite parts, because that's when you stop and say, okay, this is a dude. This is a dude. I think Gunnar Helm is definitely, worthy of being in that category of a dude. He's got some yards after the catch skills. You know how important that is for the tight end position. We talk about that a lot. He's got them. See a few little moves from him, catching hitches, making the first guy miss, picking up yak over the middle. End of the year with 420 yards for 7 per reception after the catch. So those are pretty good numbers from him there. And then I saw some ridiculous catches from him as well. Like the classic tight end where you're going to be in these 50-50 situations quite a bit, especially on the outside. And that's where he had 2 of the best catches I've seen, from this entire group, period, against Georgia, and I can't remember the other one, but there were 2 of them that I was just like, wow, like he's got that. So I thought he was a pretty all around complete player. Before we get to the, knocks on him, what did you think?
I really liked Gunnar Helm. I feel like every time I watched Texas, I was like, man, 85 is making an impact. And I think he is pretty good as a run blocker. He's mostly an inline player. There's some of these guys that mix in slot work and inline. He's out in the slot about 20% of the time, but spends pretty much 80% of the time in line as like a true tight end. And I think he does really well. Like you said, I think he's also a fluid player. He's quicker than, his size would indicate. He creates good angles, and he has really good hands. I have him. This was my hot take. I asked you how hot I should get.
Oh God. Oh, okay.
As my number 2 tight end.
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
Wow.
I just think the movement skills at this size is hard to come by, and some of the other guys are either lighter, worse blockers, so it's going to be harder for them to stay on the field, or don't have the ability to pluck the ball out of the air like Helm does. And I think that he can find a 3-down role on an offense pretty easily, similar to like how you felt about Tucker Kraft a couple of years ago, where he's a little bit better of a blocker, I would say Kraft was, but I think Helm has the potential to become, a nasty blocker like that, and then have the receiving skills to pair up with it and become a pretty good receiver on top of it.
Yeah, he ran one of the best routes I've seen from a tight end this entire year watching this class. Like it was a double move out, like he sold the dig and then came back across the defender's face and just like exploded into the out, and there was just massive separation. And that was like one of the first reps I saw from him, and I was like, wait a minute,
yeah,
are we in for something special here with Gunnar Helm? And I will say, like, the results versus, like man coverage like that were not always as satisfying as that rep was. Certainly, he has it in his bag, and that's what you love, the fluidity and the explosiveness out of your breaks at this size, and he does put that out, but not super consistent against man coverage. It's something where it's kind of a rep to rep thing for him. Zone coverage, I also thought, not always finding space against zone. So learning how to separate a little bit, learning how to find space, learning, building that skill set as a route runner, continuing to develop that. That's always going to be something we're talking about in, 95% of cases with tight ends.
Mm-hmm.
Develop your routes, get better as a blocker, because that's the next thing. It's like he's fine as a blocker right now. He's got a foundation, but he's got to get stronger. He's got to be able to move guys more, especially as a player that's playing mostly in line, and that's kind of what you'd expect him to do in the NFL as well. Got to get stronger at the point of attack, but even then, it's like you still see reps of him knowing where to be, getting his hands on guys, and doing well enough at this point.
Yeah, he can be a good blocker. Like you can see the reps where he wins, but he is inconsistent as a blocker for sure. Where it's like, all right, you kind of got blown off your spot there. Like I wish, and like get beat with a swim move, and now the guy's inside, and your running back's dead to rights, and those are definitely the reps. And then I agree with the man coverage. Like he's quick and he's pretty smooth, but when a guy is like in phase with him, he's not gonna like wow you with separation on every route. And the thing about that is like, I guess I don't know if that matters a ton to me, because I mean, a lot of tight ends aren't being like a primary target against man coverage most of the time anyway, unless they're against a linebacker where they have, unless you're like Travis Kelce or, Mark Andrews a couple years ago, where you're the target in an offense. I don't know if that's like what an NFL offense is going to ask of you. That being said, I think he has like the size and the speed to be able to win those routes in the future with more development and time. And so it's all of like, how much do you want to perfect your craft? And at that point, hands off for us, hands on for whatever NFL team they're taken by. But I like the tools that he has.
Yeah, and I will say that's an important bit of context, and I feel like we probably bring this up every year, but this idea of like role in the NFL and what are we expecting these guys to become? Because you said it at the top, it's like it's going to be scheme dependent on, are you getting the tight end involved? But then the other side of that coin is, what does your tight end let you do? Mm-hmm. How can they let you, scheme them touches, and what are they capable of at the position? And I think you have guys up on this list, at least for me, that I'm seeing like, there's going to be offensive coordinators like, what can't we do with this guy? I think Helm is just a little bit more traditional in that sense of what you're going to be asking him to do at this position, but that's not really a knock either. I still like, and also I have a second round grade on him.
Right.
I have second round or higher grades on every single tight end that I'm talking about on my list today. That's the kind of class that we're talking about here. So
yeah, feels pretty good. So who's your number 5? Or it's my number 5.
Yeah. Your number 5.
My number 5 is Mason Taylor at LSU. So Mason Taylor is a junior. I don't know if he's officially declared yet or not.
He has. Yeah.
Okay. He's 6'5", 255, so another bigger body player. And I think just what stood out to me with Taylor is he is really smooth. He's a very fluid player. When he gets his hands on you, he's a pretty solid blocker. The routes are here and there, but also great hands. He catches the ball away from his body a lot. He tracks it well over his shoulder, running up that seam, which is really important for a tight end. Like against cover 3, got safeties converging on him, and he'll still come down with it. I thought that was pretty good. He's never been a real consistent producer for LSU. We know, I mean, what this team has had in terms of targets surrounding the tight end position. And this year was a little bit of a down year in terms of quarterback play, I think. But that being said, like, still never commanded a ton of targets. This year was his best year, his junior year. But 79 targets, 55 receptions, 546 yards, 2 times finding the end zone. So, I just think Taylor, he's a smooth athlete. He can run after the catch pretty well. He's got pretty good acceleration once he gets the ball on his hands. Would like him to be a little more physical with the ball in his hands. And as a route runner, I feel like he kind of turns into a receiver, which is a good thing. But I also want you to be a tight end at the same time and, punish some guys for not making a business decision. But yeah, I think could work better as a blocker, could do some better work. And then there are some times where it's like, what happened to the great hands that I saw like 3 plays ago? Because he has a couple of drops where it's just like concentration drops. He's thinking about what he's going to do after the catch. But yeah, what do you think of Mason Taylor?
I like him a lot. He's my number 4 tight end in this class, and I did toy with the idea of even having him higher on this list, but the 3 guys I have ahead of him, I couldn't do it. But man, watching Taylor was one of those where you're kind of sitting there and this was one of those players like you're talking about with Helm, where we watch Kayshawn 2 years ago. Taylor's there. We watch Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr. last year. Taylor's there. So you kind of have an idea of what this player is, because I'm sitting there watching these LSU games the last 2 years, and I'm like, man, like that was a pretty nice play by 86. Like, who is this guy? But like you said, when you're behind those sorts of players on the outside, and we know what LSU is, like he's not putting up ridiculous numbers. But that being said, this is actually the all-time leading tight end receiver in LSU. Yeah. The best of all of them. It's a tight end. No. This is LSU's all-time leading tight end receiver. So for 3 years, he was very solid for them behind stars. And what I loved about this year is when that star wasn't in the room, he started to command more work. Like, it was very clear that the last 2 years, 22 and 23, it's like he was getting mixed in as the 3rd option, 4th option in the offense. Like, and he was putting up pretty decent numbers there. This year, they're looking his way a little more often. 79 targets this year. Previously, his high had been 55. And he made the most out of it, I thought. 546 yards, 2 touchdowns, like very smooth, like you said, very fluid player. He's running a ton of digs out of the slot, and that was a route that he was winning time and time again. Like, it seemed like every single time he was getting separation, getting off of his break quickly and explosively, and becoming available for the quarterback, Nussmeier. So I was really impressed by what I saw. I came away kind of thinking, Brian Kelly, once upon a time at Notre Dame, if this player was wearing a golden dome, what are we talking about right now? If he's not an LSU Tiger, what are we talking about with this player? I think he has a little bit more notoriety if he's playing at a school like that. Now, that being said, the other side of it, I thought the dig was great. There's not a lot else. He works the seam really well, like you said. You're not getting a lot of outbreaking routes, which, again, these are tight ends. Like, I'm not asking you to run a full route tree, but if you can, that's great. Didn't see a ton of it from him outside of the few routes that you're getting. And after the catch, I agree. I don't think he was nasty. I don't think he was running as hard as even a player like Helm does and picking up those tough yards after the catch. Some guys are doing it with elusiveness. Some guys are doing it with power. Some guys are doing it with both. I thought Taylor just didn't really have a super strength in that area of his game. And the hands, it's funny that you bring that up because for the last 2 years, his problem has been his hands. Plus 7% drop rate the last 2 seasons. This year he got it down in a big way. 1.8%, and contested numbers were way up for him. 8 for 15 in contested situations, and he had some of the most ridiculous catches I've seen from tight ends this year as well. So that's kind of I'm mixing my strengths, my weaknesses. It's all to say that this is a really good player, and I am really excited to see, how he continues to develop. He's definitely a player that needs that development again, like blocking absolutely needs to get stronger, needs to get better, but he's a fun one.
Yeah, the one route that you brought up, the outbreaking routes. They have him run the whip route a fair amount of times, and I said, like, when we were doing Josh Downs, I think I was like, we need to stop talking about whip routes because there's no way to guard a whip route. Like, if you're man to man, the whip route's going to get open if you're decent at running it. I found the first guy that can't get open on a whip route. Like, I don't know what it is, but this is like, brother cannot shake somebody on a whip route. And that's okay. I mean, you're a tight end, you're a big guy, you're moving a lot of weight around. It's all right, but let's get that one out of the playbook for this player. Let's just run an out or run a little stick option route. Let's get away from the whip from the big fella.
All right.
So your number 4 is Mason Taylor. Your number 5 is Gunnar Helm. So
yes.
It's my number 4.
And your number 4.
This is going to shock the people.
Oh,
this
God.
is the other end of the hot take because somebody has to move down if Gunnar Helm moves up, right?
That's right.
It's Harold Fannin.
It's fine.
Where do you have him?
3.
Yeah. Okay. So,
but
only one spot different.
And just to be clear here, like, Fannin is extremely close to Taylor and Helm for me. Like, I was toying with the idea of flipping Taylor and Fannin. So do not get the idea that, like, you are way too low on Fannin or something here.
That does encourage me a little bit. And you're like, the listener is there, and they're like, Harold Fannin had almost 1,600 yards, 10 touchdowns, 117 catches, 150 targets. You guys loved him during the season. What's going on? That's why we watch the tape. That's why we dig in. And I'll talk about the things I liked about Fannin first, because I don't want this to be negative about him, because that's not what this is. This is just a good tight end class, like we've been outlining, and Fannin is a good tight end. He is a good runner. He has some good routes in his repertoire. He's a really good run after catch player. I think that's like what he has. There are some times where it's iffy, but there are a lot of reps where it's like, oh man, yeah, he's good with the ball in his hands. And that's why, that's how you earn 150 targets. It's like, so how is he as a separator? Here and there against man, I would say. Pretty solid against zone. That's where he shines. It's against zone coverage, running the seam. Better than maybe anybody in the class. And what's the big deal? You just run straight. The idea that Fannin is finding the spot, running with pace, and catching the ball with the expectation of getting rocked by one of those safeties. We talk about that a lot. And sometimes just shaking those safeties on the tackle. He's so good. So does that. The over routes out of play action, every tight end needs to be able to do that. He does it really well. Once he gets up to speed, he has some good speed. But yeah, Fannin at 4. What do you got for me?
He is so enigmatic. Like, I would be willing to bet there are guys out there that are like, yeah, he's like my tight end 8. And I understand that. Like, I totally understand that. He is a very difficult player to try to understand, because the number one thing that I came away from watching him, I came away saying, what are we going to do with him in the NFL?
Right.
And that is a very scary place to be, especially for a tight end, because usually it just doesn't work. Like, what are you supposed to do? It doesn't feel like he's an inline tight end. He's too small, first of all, 6'4", 230. He doesn't have the traditional size that you're talking about. He's a pretty decent blocker when they're asking him to get involved, but like at the NFL level, I can't see it holding up at this size. Is he technical enough to consistently win out of the slot as a tight end, as a move, Y tight end weapon? I don't think so either. Like, he's not that great against man coverage. He's not running a lot of routes. Like, a lot of his touches are screens and stuff that they're cooking up for him because he's obviously the best player on this team. It's how he became, the all-time leading receiver tight end in college football history for a single season. He broke the receptions and receiving yard record this year at Bowling Green. It's because they just needed to get the ball in his hands. That was their best chance to win on a week-to-week basis. So is he getting 1,500 yards by running, posts and corners and getting up over the middle of the field? And no, he's not. He's getting the ball 5 yards from the line of scrimmage, and they're getting blockers in front of him. And he's putting his number one asset on display, which is his ability to make guys miss and create yards after the catch. And that's why I just can't put him lower. Like, I am willing to lose this take, crash into the brick wall. Like, you had a Fannin as your number 3 tight end. I will die with this take because you just don't get players at this position that can create yards like Fannin can, and create yards against all of the opponents on the schedule. Yep. Not just Western Michigan, not just, Arkansas State. It's Penn State. It's Texas A&M. He looks like the exact same player against those schools as he did against the rest of the schedule. In fact, he made the smaller schools look even more pathetic. Like, the Western Michigan game is one of the best single games from a tight end all year. And so I think he's just a player you bet on. Some NFL team is going to see him and say, okay, I think we can do this with him. And that's good enough for me right now, because I just see too much natural ability for a player here that, yeah, he's rough around the edges, but man, he's doing stuff that not a lot of other guys can.
Yeah, I agree. I'll hit on my weaknesses, because it's like, so Fannin, like you said, very enigmatic. There are reps where he looks and probably is the best player on the field. Like, he has a blocking rep against Penn State where he drives Abdul Carter back 5 yards. And it's like, okay, that's awesome. But then he'll lose to Western Michigan edge. And it's because he's off balance and he's set too narrow. And there's just it's an inconsistent tape, I would say. And that's, surprising to me when I watched it, because I was like, hey, Fannin time, let's go. Hopefully he ends up as my tight end 1. That's what I wanted out of Fannin, because I mean, of the absurd numbers and the games we watched throughout the season, it's just, you see 0 everywhere. And there's a lot of those positives, but it's the route running is just super erratic almost. He is doing at the top of his routes, he'll shake his whole upper body to try to sell the inside, and we just got to clean it up. And can he do that? Absolutely. But like you said, we can't use him as a slot guy that is going to get, gonna line up outside from Taron Johnson and win. I just don't see that happening. So can you do it against slot corners in college? I'd say so. Can you win against nickel safeties? Probably. But in the NFL, it's just going to be tough to win the way he wins at the NCAA level. So, like you said, though, it's a extraordinary athlete with great yak ability. And like, is that enough? I don't know, but some team can, like, if he goes to the right spot, like, can mine it out of him, I'd say.
Yeah. And I didn't touch on it, but the point about his skills at the catch point also need to be acknowledged here, because he's also very good. Like those seam routes, like you said, you're running in a straight line, dude. That's one of the routes on film where when I see guys make tough catches in the seam, I'm like, big check mark. Like, you got toughness, you got grit, you're fearless. Like, he is extending his hands over his head in the seam with a safety coming down on him. Doesn't matter. So, he'll be one of the most interesting stories of the draft. And to be quite honest with you, he is the youngest tight end in this draft group. He will only be 20 years old when he is selected. Do not expect anything from Harold Fannin for years. Like, do not, if you saw this season, hell of a player, incredibly fun year. If you got into some Harold Fannin highlights and you said, I want this guy on my dynasty team, if you draft him, you better be ready to sit for 2 to 3 years while a team develops him and gets him up to where he needs to be physically, mentally, and everywhere else.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And people are going to be impatient with them, and they're going to expect, a 1,000-yard receiver or whatever out of Fannin, because you see, like you said, the 1,500 yards, a record breaker, all of that. But this is a player that needs a little bit of time. This is not Kyle Pitts. I know we will say it every year, but that's the name that I was thinking a little bit when I was watching this player. A little bit undersized, great receiver. This is not that player. Pitts was different. Pitts was also really good as a rookie. But Fannin, we will need to wait a couple of years to see real production out of this player. So don't give up early because you're discouraged from his rookie stats, I would say. The name had to come up. I'm sorry.
I get it. I'm reeling a little bit here as I'm trying to come back into it. But I do, not to belabor this, but like, it also needs to be said about how he runs. Like, this is not Mr. Fluidity out there. Like, you bring up the name Kyle Pitts, and I'm looking at the guys in front of this player on my list, and even the guys behind him. You're talking about different styles of movement. You're talking about players that have the flexibility, the fluidity. Fannin is one of the most interesting runners you're going to come across. He's running, the feet are way outside. Like, it's very Jaheim Bell. We said that during the year. It's like, that was how Jaheim Bell ran, and it looked a little awkward, and it doesn't look very fluid, and it doesn't look very natural, but he makes it work. So I'm not going to hold it against him, but it needs to be said.
Yep.
All right. So number 3 on your list, because I only have 2 and 1 left.
That's right. So you had Helm at 5, you had Taylor at 4, and then Loveland at not Loveland. I have Loveland at 3.
Yeah. Yeah, you do.
And you had Fannin at 3.
Yeah.
So Colston Loveland is my number 3 tight end. Loveland was, I think, the number 1 kind of consensus going into the season, kind of expected to be the guy at Michigan. And I wasn't very disappointed with his tape, but like we've been, hammering home, this is just like a pretty solid tight end class. Like I just liked other guys more. But this is another big guy that is a very, very fluid mover. 6'5", 245 out of Loveland. He had 582 yards, which was a little down year from last year at 649. But the opportunities were many this year. I mean, this Michigan offense was obviously worse this year than it was last year. No J.J. McCarthy, obviously. Other players left for the NFL after their national championship season. But Loveland had 20 more targets this year and 11 more catches. So that kind of tells you the cap that was put on this offense a little bit. But like I said, he is silky smooth as a route runner. He's pretty good at the catch point. He's a solid blocker. There are some times where he'll get blown up off his spot, but a lot of the times he's holding his own against these D linemen and linebackers. But him against zone is money. I mean, he is finding soft spots a lot. He is, timing seems to be really good with, both quarterbacks. Obviously, he was good with JJ last year, and he's also good with whoever their quarterback was this year. Don't really care about him. But yeah, it just seems like he understands, where the sticks are, where he needs to be, when he needs to be there, and he finds soft spots a lot against zone. What do you think about Loveland?
Which quarterback? That's the question, because there's multiple. Yeah. But so obviously I was a huge fan before the year. Came in number 1 tight end in the class for me. Nothing has changed. I absolutely love Colston Loveland. Like, there are 2 players in my tier 1. Like, this is a very good class. All these guys below are second round grades for me, late to mid in most cases. This is a massive tier jump. I have the next 2 guys in round 1 and not late. And so Loveland for me, and this is what's so interesting about this class, because number 1 is a very different player. You're going to ask these guys to play very different roles at the NFL level. And a player like Loveland is going to play a little bit more of a specialized role. You're going to play him in the slot. Like, I can't see a world in which you are asking Loveland to play in line more than 25% of the time. Like, because in college, he's playing, last year was even more pronounced, I believe, but this year, roughly 60-70% of the time he's playing either out wide or in the slot, because that's just who he is. 6'5", 245, very lanky, thin frame, not super strong. He's not going to get in line. Like, he can block, he can get involved, but it's not something where you see it and think, man, he's going to be able to do this against, the 300-pound guys at the next level. But what he can do is be an unbelievable slot tight end. Like, his movement skills at this position are truly ridiculous. His ability to snap off routes, in breaks, out breaks, work down the field vertically. Really, there's nothing that you don't see from him on film in terms of route running, and nothing that he isn't doing at a very high level. I love the fluidity. I love the acceleration. I love the burst. I love the speed. The hands were much improved this year. That was the biggest knock and kind of the biggest question mark on him for me coming into the year was 10% drop rate, following up an 11% drop rate season. That's got to get better. This year, 2 drops, 3.4%, much improved. Did regress a little bit in the contested numbers, but again, we can maybe chalk a little bit up to the quarterback play. This was the same conversation we had with Marv once upon a time. Like, you go from Stroud to Kyle McCord, who, whatever happened to Kyle McCord
is back. Don't forget Syracuse legend Kyle McCord.
I can't believe I actually have to watch him for this class. It makes me sick, but
I'm not. I've seen what I needed to see.
So you still see moments from him in those contested situations. There's even a few on like that weren't converted. Like, they were either called back on penalties, or I believe there was an illegal touching play that he had where it was just like he's making some pretty ridiculous catches and they're not being represented in the stat sheet, but they're definitely there on film. So, he a little bit more specialized, and that's why I think he is not, maybe even not quite on even the same level as number 1 in this class. He's more of like a 1B tier, but I love, getting him in the right scheme, a team that has a clear idea of how to utilize him. I absolutely love what this player can turn into.
I just need these quarterbacks to just throw it to him at the break. Like, I feel like he could have had 1,000 yards if he had just, because he's open once like he gets to the top of his route.
Yeah.
And quarterbacks are just sitting, waiting, and then like throw it to him in the tightest window they can find. And it's like Loveland can be a tight end that plays either like 60% of the time in the slot, 70% of the time in the slot. And if an NFL team is willing to do that with him, kind of like how like Dalton Kincaid is used for the Bills, where they're not asking him to put his hand in the dirt a lot, I'm in. I'm all the way in.
So number 1 is Tyler Warren, unanimously.
Yep.
I mean, you want to talk about a player that comes out of nowhere, basically. And this extends all the way like through his entire athletic life cycle. I'm going to take you on a little bit of a journey before I turn it over to you to actually talk about what the player is good at. But multi-sport star athlete in high school. Basketball, football, track. I'm sure I'm missing something. He played at a high school near Virginia Tech. And I read a story where somebody was like, hey, that's your next quarterback. He's playing next door at the high school. And they were kind of laughing like, ha, 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 ha. And the guy was like, no, I'm serious. This is an 8th grader that's dunking right now. Like, you need to take this kid's athleticism seriously. So he actually did commit to Virginia Tech in 2018, 2 years before his recruiting class. He committed to play quarterback at Virginia Tech. And over the course of 2 years, this class of 2020 recruit, he got bigger and was still really fast. And he was basically like, I'm getting looks from Penn State, Alabama, South Carolina. I'm getting looks from all these programs. I'm going to just open myself back up. And I'm not going to limit myself to playing quarterback. So that's how he ends up being a tight end, or, his primary position is tight end. But, there's a little bit more to that story, which we'll talk about. So he was a 3-star commit for Penn State, 3-star athlete that was later classified as a tight end, disappears behind a string of future pros like Brenton Strange, Theo Johnson. There's another one that I'm missing, I think, but a lot of tight ends coming out of Penn State lately, getting to the league. Not necessarily superstars, but they're getting there. Tyler Warren comes into this season with little notoriety on the national level. And by the middle of the season, everybody is stopping to say, what the hell is going on with 44? Like, what is this guy doing? And by the end of the season, Colin, it's abundantly clear that this is the best tight end in this class. So an incredible journey from Tyler Warren, and speaks to his athleticism just purely, that he was able to get from quarterback commit to first round NFL tight end prospect.
And this is a 6'6", 261-pound tight end who is, like you said, a freak athlete. I mean, this is a player that can literally do everything on a football field. And you said that he started as a quarterback. He also took snaps as a quarterback this year. He was basically their wildcat runner because he had that quarterback background. He had 3 completions on the season. He could throw the ball. He threw a touchdown against Kent State. Like, this is a player that you can use in a variety of ways. He also had 218 yards rushing and 4 touchdowns as a running back. That is like a real thing. And then on top of that, I mean, 1,200 yards receiving and 8 touchdowns. So this is a player that, I mean, people say tight ends need to be able to do everything. Tyler Warren is that guy. And you also look at him, he didn't play a ton in line. He played about 33% of his snaps in line. But when he was in line, he was great. He can dig guys out as a blocker. And I also like him as a route runner. It's not like the most polished thing, but I mean, no tight ends really are. But the stuff that he does physically is special. Like, this is a guy that is as talented with the ball in his hands as a lot of the people we've watched in this class period, outside of maybe like Genty and Hampton and Caleb Johnson. Like, outside of them, Tyler Warren has like some of the best ball in hand skills, yak ability. And that's, as you know, and as people that have been listening, is all I really care about out of a tight end. Like, can you make the first guy miss? And Tyler Warren can. And then you add in that he also is a great mover. He has reliable hands, and he will get nasty in the run game. Like, this is a guy that a guy that should be going in the back half of the first round of your dynasty drafts. This is a guy that will be going in the first round of the NFL draft. So this is the player that pundits are going to be saying, well, how high can a tight end go? You know, like, after this guy or that guy, how high can a tight end go? And he's going to be driving those conversations because of how good he was in this past year at Penn State.
Second highest grade I've given out so far. All these players, the only one who has a higher grade for me is Genty.
Yep.
Like, he's unbelievable. He is truly unbelievable. And it's one thing that you have a 6'6", 260 tight end that moves like he does in the passing game. Like, a player like him, when we talked about him a few weeks ago, like during the season, I was watching the game. He's getting a badge, and I'm watching the game, and I'm like, what the hell? Like, this guy's running out routes like he's 215 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he is moving like a player should never move at this size. So that is obviously the number one thing that you sit there and say, yeah, this guy's just different in that regard to move like that at this size. But then what really gets me with him is the run plays, because in no situation should a 260-pound player get a direct snap and bounce the run off tackle and win.
Yeah.
And he does that multiple
times.
Tackle
for loss.
Yeah. Like, he did that multiple times. He's like a 200-pound running back. He's able to bounce the run off tackle, accelerate, and win down the sideline with speed while guys are coming down on him. He's making a miss. He's outrunning them. He's breaking angles. I'm like, who is this guy? How can this even be possible? So I think what you can expect from Warren in the NFL, and what makes him such an interesting fantasy option, is he's going to get used like this in the NFL. He's not just going to be a tight end. They will get him all of these scheme touches in the same fashion that he was getting them at Penn State. Maybe not the same volume. Maybe he's not playing quarterback, but he's going to get run plays for him. He's going to get scheme touches. Like, they're going to get the ball in his hands because he's just too talented to not run. If you're going to take him, you're taking him like top 15, and you're saying we're going to scheme the offense to get the ball to this player. So incredibly impressive. I do want to point out too, the hands which were like pretty serious issue for him coming into this season. Last 2 years, I'll leave 2022 out because he only had 15 targets, but 49 targets last year, 6 drops. That was 15%. So you're like, okay, if there's one knock on the guy, maybe it's the hands. This year, 3 drops on 135 targets, 2.8%. And oh, by the way, 13 for 21 in contested catch situations. And, there's all sorts of that on film. Skying over guys, making tough catches. Like he's really, like, it's hard to find a weakness with Warren's game.
Yep. And he also handled like the QB sneaks for this team. So like if you have a quarterback that you're hesitant to run on sneaks because he has an injury history or whatever, like there you go. Warren can do it. Kind of how the Packers use Tucker Kraft on the QB sneaks. He can do that. I mean, yeah, I love this player, and I'm glad that we have, 2 positions where we're getting like premier players in this class.
Did you have anything that stood out to you? Like, this is something he needs to work on. I have one thing.
It's just like the routes against man are the only thing where like he seems to win physically a lot of the time, and that might get called in the NFL sometimes, the push offs and the fighting, but it wasn't like a huge flag for me.
I thought actually versus zone, there were some reps where I was like, he's not finding that spot. Like he's missing his spot. The instinct wasn't quite there to know where to get down, specifically on like these hook routes where he's just trying to get inside, the middle zones, and like he's just kind of running into him a little bit too often, which is weird for a player that seems like just he knows everything that's going on. Like you're asking him to play 3 positions and he's doing it without a hitch. So it is, I don't know if maybe that was just like certain plays or certain games that I was watching that was showing up, because it doesn't seem like the kind of player that would struggle to identify, how to get down in a zone. But
he drifts every once in a while too. He'll drift upfield a little bit, and that'll close some windows that might be available. But again, it's like proper coaching probably gets rid of that pretty easy.
Yeah. And you already said this, but I do want to emphasize ass kicker as a blocker. Like maybe the only guy that we've talked about, and maybe the only guy in the class period that isn't just a pure blocker.
Yeah.
That is a plus blocker. Yeah, already. So not only the best receiving threat at the position, perhaps, but also the best blocker of all of these guys that we're talking about. So
he's the only player that I watched that I would feel comfortable using as like a point of attack blocker. And that's how he's used at Penn State. He is used on like inside zone plays as it crosses the formation and just stone walls everybody that he comes across. And don't let him get to the second level, because he's going to bury guys. And like he has a couple pancakes on tape where he's coming like cracking back, and it's like trouble. You like got to keep your eye out for 44.
Love him, man. What a guy. Always going to have a special place in my heart. Shout out College Football 25.
Yep. As the head coach of Penn State.
What a ride. Anyway, all right. So we did it. We that's 5, and we were in sync. That's the first time, I think, of any of the positions that we were 5 for 5 each other.
Yeah, we had all the same guys.
Same names, different orders, but outside of those 5 players, anybody worth noting on your end?
I wanted to bring up Oscar Delp. We don't know if he's going to come out. I think I don't know if I could speak for both of us, but at a point we both thought that Oscar Delp might be the heir apparent to Brock Bowers. There were some games, not this season, but last season, where he like filled in for Brock Bowers after the tightrope surgery that Bowers had, and he looked really good. This year didn't do much, so we both kind of anticipate him going back to school. Some names that we've talked about before, Bryson Nesbitt and Luke Lachey. Nesbitt out of UNC, Lachey out of Iowa. Have feelings for them, but don't want to get in a relationship.
Nice.
Yeah.
Did you watch Lachey from this year at all?
I watched him like mid-season and didn't love what I saw, so I just kind of skipped him for this.
Yeah. Really, really unfortunate. I think the ACL injury did a number on him a little bit.
Yeah.
I think he lost a step with that. So here's to hoping he can get it back, but I saw the same thing. The one player I want to shout out who very narrowly missed my top 5 is Elijah Arroyo. Did you watch him?
Nope.
Miami, early declare junior. He's in. Had his best year this year with Cam Ward. 590 yards, 7 touchdowns. 3 years leading up to this year, his previous high was 80 yards, and that was as a freshman. So legitimately comes out of nowhere in his 4th season. But man, he's got wheels.
He's fast. He's
really fast. So, and I'm kind of questioning his size because he's listed at 6'4", 245, and he's lining up next to wide receivers, and I'm like, which one's which? Like, they look like the same size, same players. So I'm not sure what he's going to come in at when he tests and what the size really looks like. But man, if he's 245 and he's moving like he does, it's really impressive. And he's got some stuff, obviously, to like clean, like specifically as a blocker, you're just not going to ask him to block right now. He's nowhere close to where he needs to be. But for a player that you can scheme, like kind of in the Chigo Okonkwo sort of a role where you're going to like get him touches down the field, and maybe they're going to be few and far between for a couple of years, but like the wheels are going to play at the NFL level, and there's going to be touches available for him, and he could develop into a really nice tight end. So
there will be a time where you see like Elijah Arroyo 60-yard touchdown.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And then you're going to be like, oh, there's the guy. I know that name.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, he's fun. He's really fun. So outside of that though, yeah, it's like Lachey, and then Mitchell Evans was another ACL tear where it's like, we're not quite where we were, and it's a little bit unfortunate, I think, but I still have my eyes on those two guys. Liked them a lot coming into the year. Pre-ACL tear tape is right. Really good on those guys. So it's a fun class. It's a really fun class. It runs deep. There's notable names deeper in the class, but all the names we're talking about today, I think, are day 2 or higher guys for sure.
A lot of good players. Refreshingly fun tight end class to scout, where you're not like, I don't really know if this guy will ever find a role. I feel like all these players can somehow, some way find a way to get a role, and all have opportunity ahead of them to make a real impact in an NFL offense. And I think that's pretty rare.
We have one rankings show left to do in Rankings 2.0, but it's a big one. It's an important one because we got IDPs into the program as much as we can during the season, but now's the time to really understand what we have here. We know that IDPs, specifically speaking fantasy terms, a lot of this is going to come to light post-draft, understanding where these guys are slotting in and what the roles are looking like. But we can take a minute to take a look at the talent that we have in this group, and one player in specific that I'm thinking of that is seemingly rising every single day, was already one of our top IDPs coming into the season, but maybe a change on the top. I guess we'll find out next week.
Yeah, we have an IDP class of all time. So tune in.
If you enjoyed our discussion about tight ends, this very fun tight end group highlighted by some potential stars at the position, be sure to find us on Twitter, camp_dynasty, and TikTok. Well, it still exists, I suppose.
Yeah, we might not be saying that next week.
Yeah, this might be the last one of those you're ever going to hear.
YouTube Shorts.
Yeah, that's the place to really be. You can give us some legacy follows so we can go out with a bang on TikTok, but head over to YouTube, hit subscribe. Doing a lot of good work over there with the shorts, so check that out. And if you are watching on YouTube already, you could head over to the pod feed if you wanted to and just give us a rating or a review, a like, whatever you got to do. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, just anything helps, and we very much appreciate it.
Anything helps.
That's
right. On my cardboard sign.
All right. Is that it? Are we done?
That's it. We plugged everything. We talked about all the tight ends. Thank you for watching Camp Dynasty this week. We'll see you next week.